Thanks, Apurva. Again, super excited to be here. I'm talking to all of you live from San Francisco, bright and sunny despite 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Hopefully, everybody is doing okay, especially down in Southern California. My name is Talha. I'm the CISO and the CIO at HashiCorp. What I'll do today is just give my sense of how I see the market evolving, the threat model, lessons learned from hundreds and thousands of practitioners we talk to, as well as trends I've seen in identity evolution in enterprise software. Before I start, just giving a sense of the lay of the land. We do the survey every year with all of our customers, and generally with the 20 years of cloud adoption, a lot of companies today, they have some notion of cloud adoption already. But when you go talk to teams and CIOs and CTOs, how much they are actually getting value out of cloud and how much of their infra and applications are still getting powered by cloud, it's still early days in their maturity journey. Where I'm going with this is there are a bunch of challenges people face with cloud across the globe, and some markets are more mature than the others, some verticals are more mature than the others. But generally, if I characterize the category of issues, they fit in three buckets. It's cost, how much investments you're putting in cloud and what value you're getting out of them. It's risk. How do you secure cloud is very different than how do you secure traditional infrastructure. And then value to the business in terms of how much time your developers are spending on their day job in developing applications and getting access and managing operations versus actually building application infrastructure that drive the business forward. What's happening as companies started going through this journey of cloud and transitioning to cloud, you have all these traditional data centers. In traditional data centers, companies had a lot more responsibility of security at every layer, at network layer, at application layer, at database layer, at all layers of TCP stack, and different kinds of process controls and technologies apply differently. When companies move to cloud, the shared responsibility model shifts higher in the stack, and attackers shift their focus as well, where you have less concerns to care about, like, do I care about the firewall security in AWS environment compared to how I did network security traditionally. But what's happening with the threat environment is attacks are moving up higher in the stack, a lot more application layer attacks, a lot more identity related attacks. And I'm sure this is not news to any security practitioner or buyer in this keynote today. You look at any data breach studies, Verizon publishes one every year, and you look at the trends. Even today, a lot of attacks and breaches and incidents, they start with some sort of a stolen or compromised credential or identity. And that's basically one of the biggest root causes of attacks, and also a high fidelity, high velocity attack. You all may be wondering, it's not a new problem. And yes, it's not a new problem. These attacks existed. They always were there. It's always a cat and mouse game of security controls versus attacker techniques. But what's happening now is the problem getting better or worse with cloud. And it is getting bigger. And the reason it's getting bigger is when you think about identity and access management in a lot of companies, and practitioners, they are very well versed in triangulating what does identity means, and more in context of human identity. I'm Talha, I'm a user, I'm a developer, I have a record in my HRIS or Active Directory or what have you, and my authentication and authorization constructs flow from these IAM environments. And when you start going into machine identity or non-human identity, call it whatever you want to call it, typically those are distributed across the orgs in various operational teams, managed very, very differently. Some manage better, some not manage better. Some people try to solve this from secrets management angle. Some people try to solve it from a full IAM lifecycle angle. And it's a spectrum of maturity in between. And more often than not, these non-human identities, they're typically very high privilege and access to a lot of data. When you think about system integration between, I don't know, your AWS environment and your data warehouse, if you Snowflake or Databricks or what have you, typically these service accounts, bot accounts, non-human accounts, they will have full federated access to a lot of privileged access and data because they are meant for integrations of sort. And then when attackers do compromise these things, they use them as a key attack vector for compromise, for privilege escalation, and whatnot. And generally, if you categorize and index these identities in your environment, you'll always outnumber human to machine identities by many factors. My general sense today is somewhere between 25 to 50x, but they obviously depend on the kind of company environment you're working through. So the problem is going worse. And the reason it's going worse is if you take a step back and look at how traditionally environments were built, legacy identity was relatively simple. Most companies and most security stories started with what I call a castle and moat construct, where everything in the data center people assume is more trusted than anything outside the data center. So there's more network parameter kind of constructs people align their security towards. Everything in, when you have a web application talking to a database, application has credentials hard-coded somewhere. I'm sure nobody has seen that anywhere in their environment. But you still have this notion of trust where like, hey, my application in DB is in my network. I will try to protect this network with some firewall tools. And the only way to add users on these zones is through a firewall ticket or changing. But the notion of parameter became the trust model. When you move these things to cloud, move from traditional to modern infrastructure, you very quickly realize your open up an S3 bucket is one API call away that any developer can basically just write a one line of code and do it. There's no layers of go through a network team, go through identity team, go through security team to approve. How do you connect an AWS environment back to something which is a system of record internally? And basically, all these constructs of identities has exploded. Identities belong to applications, to network identities, to user identities. And really, identity is becoming the parameter, not your network anymore. We talked about the kind of non-human identities, and different people will have a different lens to it. But generally, if you try to categorize and classify these different types of NHIs, they're all over the place. Your OAuth tokens, your API keys, your service accounts, your bot accounts, but even down to if you try to triangulate how people get access to modern cloud environments, all the role definitions and authorization constructs, where somebody is translating a human identity to some sort of an automation to get them like, hey, I'm a developer, I need access to an AWS resource, I will try to use an IAM role to perform some sort of an operations. And where will you find them? Basically everywhere where anything is connected to something. And generally that's a challenge where people don't even know where all these NHIs live in their environment. Moving to how I think about just like aligning the value chain when you're thinking this through from risk management angle, or how to think about this from in a modern DevOps environment or even your traditional environment. You have all these infrastructure build out and application delivery value chain that I would call working for the business. You have applications from anything from any source code management system to release management system being design, build, run applications. You start from the left, you deploy these applications to some sort of an infrastructure. Could be your traditional environment built on VMware or something, or could be your cloud environment built on Azure, GCP, AWS, if you're in China, Ali Cloud, what have you. And then from security lifecycle, your security risk and compliance team are trying to tackle the risk angles of I need monitoring, I need more adherence to controls, both in my traditional environment, but also my cloud environment. And then finally, both your DevOps teams, security teams, compliance teams, they're all monitoring this whole value delivery chain from an angle of performance, quality, security, risk, and compliance. But if you take a step back, how does the identity life cycle, where does it fit? It actually fits throughout your value delivery chain and your DevOps life cycle. And we'll double click a little bit into how to think about this. Just a few guiding principles. We talked about identity becoming the parameter, and that's really how to think about zero trust in a modern environment. It's not network, it's not your firewall rules, it's not your traditional security models of credentials management. Really strong identity tied to everything, whether it's an endpoint or application or serverless or your SaaS or your Snowflake or DB, what have you. That really starts becoming the parameter, because strong identity and security starts from there. And then thinking that through, how do you apply policies consistently and managing life cycle across your environment. Yeah, so again, think through this from the lens of, just like you apply a life cycle to human users, where some human comes into a company, they have access to certain things. When they change their roles, you need to certify their access. Some of the authentication authorization lifecycle principles are similar, but apply differently in an NHI environment. And what I guide CISOs and CTOs I work with is try to have a full life cycle element to that model. And where I recommend starting from is you'll see similarities and parallels to the NIST cybersecurity framework here. It's like you start from identification, like how do you know what's in your environment, and inventory and find all these NHI accounts tied with criticality of asset, tied with the business process that's most sensitive to your company. And you start with discovery, you start with inventory, you start with classification, and then it's a matter of, if the ownership is distributed, how do you tag correct ownership and then apply a mechanism to have a consistent policy and usage across your environment. Then a lot of the work in modern environments are around, how do you protect these? So anything from provisioning these identities, whether it's, I don't know, a Snowflake to S3 integration, whether it's an Okta to Workday integration, but it's a whole life cycle of, like, what's the just-in-time access provisioning, what's deprovisioning, what's the right set of authorization, what's the entitlement review, and things of those nature. And then you start moving up in the stack of, if you've done identification, governance, protection right, then you have to still do work on monitoring and detection of, how are these NHIs being used? Are they applying least privilege? How do you feed them into your monitoring solutions, ITDRs, and figure out from usage patterns what's the right or wrong behavior? And how do you find abuse and credential compromise faster? And then finally, all of this feedback loop feeds into your response and recovery to improve your processes. So the way to think about this is not a separate security track that can be detached from your infrastructure build out or application delivery stack. It's a maturity journey from, how do you adopt a certain set of guiding principles on the last cycle we just talked about. Then you start building some blueprints on standardizing them against one set of applications or two sets of applications and one business unit and two business units. And then you're scaling constructs here are, how do you try and expand coverage where you have confidence on lifecycle and management of these NHI related controls in your environment. So take a stepping back, my final slide. The rules and guiding principles of strong authentication, strong authorization, identity being the new parameter, applies very differently in cloud than it applies in your traditional data centers, and that's the modern way of doing security. There are various ways you can divide and conquer this, but if you take a step back and just look at how all of your humans and machines and applications are interacting in the company, you end up dividing in, I divide them in 4 layers. You can divide them in many different layers, but it's machine authentication, authorization. It's how do you authenticate anything that's not human, whether it's SaaS, application, endpoint, database, serverless function, what have you. When you're tying these two machine constructs together, similar strong identity and authorization. Can my billing service talk to everything on cloud, or can my billing or identity service can only talk to my user data store, as an example? But making sure those identity policies are well defined and implemented for stronger notion of authentication. And then the human to machine access and human authentication authorizations, these things are something that has always been part of core IAM programs. It's just how do you bring all these four families of concerns together for a more robust IAM program. With that, I think I am on time. I will stop sharing and come back for any Q&A.
Thank you, Talha. I'm having my first AV issue of the day, and my camera is not showing, so I will be the disembodied voice asking you Q&A.
No worries.
So we have a Q&A channel to the upper right of your screen for my audience, and so they can add questions for you as we see fit. And I got a couple questions ahead of time when folks heard that you'd be presenting, and so let me start with that while the audience provides their Q&A as well. So the first question was, can you really have a unified model for NHI access across cloud and on-prem? And I think this makes sense for a lot of our larger companies that are listening. They're always going to have an on-prem environment. And so I think what they've been seeing, if I read into the question, is that many of the newest tools will provide great support for cloud and not always provide support for on-prem environments. How do you think about that complexity for your customers?
Yeah, I think we know the drill. We have also seen these patterns, and if you think and look at how cloud migrations actually work, it's not a binary switch from on-prem to cloud, and nothing on on-prem exists anymore. It's always a journey. You will move one set of apps and two sets of apps and 5 sets of apps and 20 sets of apps. And what we've seen generally as a pattern, especially in larger, not the companies who are cloud native and were born in cloud, they have a huge liberty of you're starting from scratch. But most Fortune 1000 companies, and basically pretty much everybody else in the world who has been running a business for decades, they have data centers, and when they're moving applications, they start building system of engagement applications in cloud, system of records are still on-prem, and they have to figure out a way for their system of engagement apps, which are built in cloud and mobile first world and AI world, to talk to system of records which are on-prem. And this goes back to the similar identity network challenges we talked about. If you had all the applications sitting in one data center, you could have all right, this is my private data center, my app talks to my DB, this is my trusted zone. That doesn't work in cloud. You have to have your network proxies and your IAM constructs making these things talk to each other. So yes, I think for companies who want to solve this problem more generically in enterprise, you have to solve for hybrid, not just AWS, not just Azure, not just GCP, even the 3 cloud environments. If you double click on the complexity of how their IAM constructs are structured, they're all different. Azure looks different, AWS looks different, GCP looks different. So even if you were solving for just these 3, you still have to find some commonality in how you think about abstracting a bunch of identity-related guiding principles, right? So you're not redoing the same thing differently for first AWS, then GCP, then Azure. And if you have VMware or OpenShift or something on behind the scenes in your data center, then you have to now I need one more solution for identity and access for multi-tenant environments. I think that's generally the challenge. The only other challenge is, I think the ops teams are distributed. It's easier for companies to standardize human authentication and authorization. It's one HR system, it's one Active Directory. And when you go in operations out of the house, there are different teams owning different pieces of stacks, and each one might pick or implement something else.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, the idea of having a separate control plane for every environment you run would be crushing to your operations team,
Yeah,
right? And we figured out how to avoid that with humans. So I think the burden is on us, and something we'll talk about more later
correct,
today,
correct.
which is how do we connect those environments so that humans can really manage the non-humans at the
100%.
scale we need.
And yeah, there's huge value, and I think that's part of the security team struggles in a lot of areas. Even IAM is it's not people don't know how to do IAM. A lot of people struggle with like, how do I consistently roll this out across my environment? Some of that is
Yeah.
buy-in and change management. A lot of that has to do with like, there aren't good tools to make it easy to standardize these constructs across heterogeneous environments.
Okay, let's move on to another interesting question that was something I think people are going to be talking about a lot during the day, which is AI. Didn't take us long to get to the AI question. And there are two related questions from our audience. One is just your view on AI agents as non-human identities. How do we control those? But I think there's another interesting question here, which is, if you look at the evolution of AI agents, many of them are acting on behalf of humans. So you have a non-human acting on behalf of a human. How do you think of that in relationship to an NHI access management challenge?
Yeah. I think it's maybe it's my dumb view, but I have a pretty simplistic view of this. Like, no matter how complex your AI is, end of the day, these agents are a piece of code which are doing some operations. Whether it's a handwritten Lambda function or your handwritten bash script or an AI code generated, it's a piece of code which is doing a bunch of activities. And the same concept apply. How would you authenticate an app or a Lambda function, or provide like some strong identity to a piece of script or an AI agent performing some operations? You'll have to give it an identity so you could generate through an automation identity and authorization. And then you have to think through like, what level of role and privilege and access this AI agent need. Does it need full privileged access to perform all read, write, delete operations in my environment? Or based on the kind of data it's touching, can I right size the scope and authorization for it to perform? So it's end of the day, it's basically going to be a piece of code or application that's performing some activities. So behind the scenes, it's not any different than a bash script in my mind, or a serverless function that you could have.
Got it. Yeah, I think we'll be, this is a topic that no matter how much we talk about it today, isn't really going to get solved until people are forced with the practicalities of using these agents at scale, right?
Yeah.
Which we haven't yet seen.
Yeah.
So
I
it's
think
coming.
the challenge you'll see is, and we've seen this in other kinds of identity constructs. When you think about like SCIM is a great example. People know what SCIM is, how to use SCIM, how can it be helpful for provisioning and onboarding, offboarding. There's a huge category of SaaS applications that don't support SCIM today. People struggle.
Yeah. Yep.
SSO enforcement. So if you're buying some piece of AI tech that cannot give you good IAM constructs, and you can't do right size roles and permissions, or have authorization scopes that can limit what these things do, there's very little you could do if the core application cannot give you these basic capabilities. So push your vendors to build more IAM controls in their applications that IAM technologies can then use to help you implement IAM better.
Amazing. We do have more questions. I'm sorry that we can't get to them all, but we'll try to find a way to get answers to folks after the event. Talha, I really wanted to thank you for your time and insights today. Really appreciate it. And we're looking forward to seeing how the rest of this conversation evolves over the course of the day. Thanks again.
Thank you.